at the inception of bringing a customer on board, you and the customer, the firm and the customer, exchange different information, right? And that's the real opportunity for a firm to understand who is that customer, what's their family situation, what's their corporate situation, whatever the case may be. And typically, after that initial quote bind, whatever the particular relationship is, the institution really doesn't know anything about what's going on with that customer unless something bad happens, whether it's a claim, an accident, whatever the case may be, right? So one of the whole ideas here is via these different technologies being able to really gain insight into what's going on with these customers, whatever that relationship is, on an ongoing basis. And the fights over who owns and maintains that relationship on an ongoing basis, because there's tremendous marketing advantage, upsell, cross-sell, et cetera, on owning that relationship. This isn't the only battleground, but it's certainly one of the key ones. So let's really talk about the bottom quote here, and really the point being is many of the C-level executives that I work with across industries really understand now that their business strategy and technology strategy cannot be separate. They have to be one and the same. Literally one and the same. Not one here, not one there, one. Integrated strategy, because the technology has such a significant impact on the business that they truly need to be integrated. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. This is the same sort of idea that business as usual is not going to work anymore, and the bottom line is if firms are sitting there thinking this is not going to impact them, their competition is happy. I mean, because it is going to impact them, and it's a matter of when, how, and as I mentioned earlier, how they react and how they position themselves so they actually can react. So without a doubt, the spending is there, right? There are firms, across globally, and actually these numbers are actually bigger than this. This is a somewhat older slide. Not only is the spending happening, but this is an IoT example, there's actually money in leveraging the technology. There are many successful use cases that firms are leveraging. This in particular is an example of an IoT use case, right? There are identified use cases that are quite successful. And this is interesting too. There's lots of different surveys that show this. This is actually an IBM CEO survey, but really the point of this particular slide is firms that are innovating, that are driving digital disruption internally within their organizations are outperforming their competition by significant percentages. Okay? The point being, this isn't accidental, right? There's a real movement here. The technology is real. The impact is real. So I mentioned earlier value-add services. So this is an insurance IoT example of it, but it's really applicable across all these different industries, that the deeper insights from an analytic perspective that firms are able to drive, particularly with the addition of value-add services, whether it's weather or other value-add services and data that can be integrated, create all sorts of different value-add services that firm can sell back to the customers, and their customers will pay for them, right? So this is a telematics example, right? So just some of them, in case you can't read them: vehicle theft tracking, automated emergency call, vehicle wellness reports, breakdown, et cetera, et cetera. This is a big deal. This is really a big deal. And we're going to talk about this more later on, but when it really comes to firms figuring out how to monetize this data, this is a huge point. This is without a doubt typically part of their key discussion when they're trying to figure out how to sell the analytics that they're trying to drive internally and externally. So this slide might be hard to read. So what this slide is really showing is a number of one-to-one partnerships between insurance firms and device vendors and value-add data service providers. the point of this slide, what I really want to communicate on this slide is these are one-to-one relationships. And we're going to talk about this more, and I think you were talking about this amongst yourselves actually this morning. These one-to-one relationships will not work on a long-going basis. The ecosystem has to have a many-to-many relationship, and there has to be significantly larger data sharing and information sharing across the ecosystem in order for it to actually work. So this is a problem, is the point being. And we've actually had some firms come to us looking for us to help them solve this problem. So just to take a second here on AI, ML, cognitive computing, whatever, they're like CRM, they're very generic terms and they mean different things to different people. So for the purpose of what I'm talking about today, when I'm talking about AI, it's all of this stuff, but really it's this bottom line that I'm pointing at, right? So really the ability to adapt and learn and infer, if you will, intelligence from large amounts of data, either in a real-time or historical perspective, or both, right? Okay. And just because we like to confuse the marketplace within IBM, we have a whole bunch of functionality here. We stick it all underneath one brand called Watson. It just basically confuses everybody, but that's what we did. Confuse everybody? Well, let me put it to you this way. It confuses IBMers, so, you know.
There's a lot of people.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. All right, so this was supposed to be a live demo that I mentioned to you, so I'm going to walk you through the slides. And you know, once again, from the use cases, I really wanted to give you examples of what we're doing with customers and how analytics are really driving different aspects of the marketplace, right? So in this case, it's telematics data on weather. It's in weather integrated in a real-time basis. So you've got telematics data. So does everybody know what that is? Okay, so telematics data is the data that comes out of your car when you're driving it. Higher-end cars have telematics devices built into them. They just come as part of the car, whether you know it or not. And when you actually sign your contract with that automobile vendor, you're giving them the rights to harvest that data. Whether anybody actually reads that fine print, that actually happens. For those cars that don't have built-in devices, there's all kinds of secondary devices that can be added. And anybody familiar with Progressive Insurance? And you know, they say, right, put the device in the car, and the whole idea there is they're going to use telematics data to monitor your driving patterns. And if they view that you're a good driver, they're going to give you a discount on your premium. Okay? So this is actually weather data. This is actually a real thunderstorm from the Chicago area from a couple of years ago, and it's fused with real-time map data and telematics data, right? And imagine those little circle things, those are cars that were moving within the city. And one of the things you need to notice is the different colors of the cars. We've got red, which is high risk, yellow, medium risk, green, which is low risk. And you'll notice that we've got cars marked high risk, and they're not even in the storm cell yet. So this is some pretty cool analytics. So we have some analytics called MoMA, moving object map analysis, where some people are going to think this is scary when I explain what's going on here. But when you opt into the telematics program with the insurance carrier, if they have a mature program, they're going to capture the information of where you drive. And they're going to capture trip segments, and those trip segments are going to be built into larger trips. And over a period of time, they're going to develop what are called personal points of interest, which basically means when you get in a car and start to drive, they're going to predict where you're going to go. They don't know what the endpoints are. They don't necessarily know where you're going, unless you're driving to a Starbucks every day, but they can predict, and we can predict, when these people get in their car, where they're going to go. Now, the advantage of this is the reason why those cars outside of the storm cell are marked red is we've already predicted they're going to enter the cell. So the advantage is the insurance carrier can notify these drivers and reroute them automatically to keep them out of harm's way. This is really a big deal, and I'm going to show you a video of a customer who actually implemented this. So that's that for this one. This particular slide, if you see this blue line, is if the video was alive, I'd pick out one driver and show you what her route was and why she was high risk, and it's because we're tracking her straight through the storm cell, right? And this is another interesting use case. So this one's historical. I was going to say hysterical, but no, it's historical. And in this case, we're using different data. We're taking a historical view. It's in the Chicago area also, but we're taking road condition data, traffic flow data, accident data. We're still using the same data of where our customers drove. We're integrating all of it, and the goal here is to determine what customers are taking high-risk routes through the city of Chicago. And the benefit to an insurance carrier is, we talked about value-add services. Think if your insurance carrier called you up and said, hey, we see you're going through this interchange every single day. If you go 2 blocks south and take this road, you're going to, avoid all of this stuff, right? So that's basically what this is showing here. We have this one driver, Kathy, who's taking this route. This is where she starts, and she goes through this high-risk interchange with 56 other drivers every day, and you see these other routes that can be taken. Now, you may look at this and think, well, it's kind of like what my GPS system does. It gives me multiple routes. The difference is your GPS system doesn't look at risk, doesn't know where you drive all the time necessarily, and certainly doesn't look at risk.
But if you shift 50 Cathys to the same route, I'd probably have shifted some of the risk to that route, right?
No, it's a good point. It's an ongoing process, right? So there's some more intelligence. This is showing you a simple view of, if you will, the art of the possible, but you're right about that point. So another point on this before I move on from this particular demo is in the US, your insurance carrier can warn you that you're at risk, can ask you to change your behavior, and they can do absolutely nothing to you to penalize you until you get in an accident. If I show this to somebody outside of the US, they want it now because they're regulated differently and they can take action more aggressively than within the US. So the point being is a lot of the adoption of these different analytics, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, really depends on industry and geo. So there's a lot of diversity from a geo perspective of how a lot of these technologies can be applied.
How does insurance warn you?
So in this particular case, so the real-time one, we'd actually send an alert to the driver, to the nav system in their car, or...
Get in an accident because they're looking at the alert.
Well, no, so you have to be very careful about that. No, it's a good point, right? You have to be careful. In other words, you don't want to send an alert on their mobile phone that they need to read, right? So it could be an audio alert that they just hear it, right? This is going to happen, do this. This kind of thing, which is more historical, typically it would be a phone call or something like that, so, because this is not happening real time, And this is just an idea of the alert. And I guess one other point here is many cases. How many of you here get weather alerts on your phone? How many of you pay attention to the weather alerts on your phone? Well, that's pretty good. Normally, I don't get that many hands. But the point being is a lot of these things companies have found in order to incite their customers to actually pay attention to what they're sending, that they have to offer them things. In this particular case, we're showing, hey, we want to get you out of harm's way. Here's a coupon to Starbucks. There's covered parking. Stay there. You're not going to get hit by the hail, right? So it's definitely a common practice. All right, so this is our first video. And this is really showing, this is actually a customer who I started working with a couple of years ago on this, and now they've actually implemented it.
Technology now, it has changed the way we buy, we sell, we trade, we communicate, thus clearly putting the user or the customer experience at the center of all the processes. Many industries have already transformed their model to face the empowered customers that we all are. It is now the turn of the financial services to do so, and in particular insurance. That is the transformation Groupama is going through, in particular in Italy.
Having the data is not enough. We have to change the mindset. We have to foster innovation and creativity because human experience is key in this type of work.
We do so using IoT, using telematic devices, and using also the capability of WhatsApp.
Personally, I believe that connected insurance is the future. I believe that telematics is the future of motor insurance. We have already started using the data that we collect through the IoT platform of Watson's, and we are able to recognize their trips, the way they drive, and so we will be able to better price our customers, but give them the services that they need. We are implementing new ways of paying their claims, handling their claims.
We have created a new company, The Evolution, using Groupama's expertise in insurance and telematics and Watson capabilities in software and data protection. Watson IoT is our technology platform.
This is something insurers have always dreamt of, doing risk prevention. Now, with technology, with IoT, it is possible.
For a customer, the settlement of a claim is really important. But what is even more important for him is not to have any claim. And this is what all risk prevention is about.
So I have to apologize, there's always a marketing spin on these things. I wanted to show you the use case. That was, that's really my intent here. So if we take this a step further, this is work that we did with another large global reinsurer. I can't actually share the name to this one. And they gave us existing telematics data, they gave us existing claim data, we integrated weather data, and we integrated higher quality map data. Their map data stank, for lack of a better description. And the whole goal of this was, over here on the right-hand side, is they wanted to understand from real claim data, real telematics data, real map and weather data, what driving behaviors actually caused claims. So just a question for you all. How many of you speed when you're driving? Raise the hands. Okay. So how many of you think, those who had your hands up, even though you speed, how many of you believe you're good drivers? Okay. Well, so now let's just think about this. So you get a ticket or two from your insurance company, and it doesn't matter that you've never been in an accident. You've got a black label. This kind of thing, this sort of analytics can change that whole value proposition, not only on your behalf, because they're truly understanding what driver behaviors. And so are you guys familiar with the sort of data that's collected here? Right, so telematics devices in cars, particularly the sophisticated ones, can collect data in like 200 different dimensions of all different things that are going in the car. And when you integrate that with weather data and map data, and you've got elevations, there's a whole lot of data that could be analyzed to really understand how people are driving. This is a gold mine for insurance companies, because not only can they decide who they don't want to keep, they can now decide who they want to recruit and go after at a much more intelligent level than what they do now. All right, so this is taking this concept, this next video, to the next step. You need to understand a lot of what you're going to see here is actually real already, not make-believe.
Hey, Watson. Let's rock and roll on this drizzling Saturday.
Hello, Jack. I'm ready. And speaking of rock, what would you like to hear?
Great idea. You choose. Which route are we taking?
The one that I mapped, but Highway 66 is flooded.
You're the boss. It's the scenic route then. We'll have time for a new album. What you got?
I have matched you to your favorite guitarist's preferences.
Been at my Twitter feed again?
With your permission. You always enjoyed the results.
I do. I feel so connected to him. It's as if he were here.
He's actually in London giving a concert in 25 minutes.
Interesting. So what's he listening to?
He praised his new album and 10 recent tweets and 4 radio interviews.
Let's hear it. Wow, the rain's turning to snow, just like you said.
The road is slick. Consider slowing down and switching traction control mode to snow. It's the middle button on your center console.
So, that's what that is. Got it. Whoa, what just happened?
Your anti-locking brake seems to be having trouble consistent with other vehicles. Your manufacturer just announced a recall. I recommend you have the car inspected.
I did see that envelope from the dealer, but I never got around to opening it. You know what? Let's ditch this joyride and head back. I'll do everything tomorrow. My phone's almost dead and the kids have taken the charger again.
Your phone is at 4%. You can get a new charger at a store a mile from here.
Thanks, but I have a bunch at home. Maybe we'll stop needing them one of these days.
Would you like to hear one of the 435 articles that reference that topic?
That's okay, Watson. What would I do without you?
So how does this compare with your session this morning where you're trying to figure out what 2038 would look like, right? So.
I just wonder why Watson isn't driving.
We'll get to that. All right, so this is actually the last video. We're changing to retail here, and here we're looking at the integration of blockchain and IoT. I'm assuming you guys, at least conceptually, are familiar with what blockchain is? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I purchased a packet of those. I came into my staff meeting, I put them on the table, and I said, your traceback exercise starts right now. And we timed how long it took them to get the information for each point in the food system all the way back to the farm. And I'm not going to give you the results after the pilot. But it's going to be good. If you think about the food system, it's pretty complex. It involves farmers, processors, distributors. And the way traceability is done today, each segment of the food system does it their own way. Most actually do it on paper or on systems that don't speak to each other. And so you can never have a full view of what's happening in the food system. What we hope to do with blockchain is bring all food safety system stakeholders and collaborate so that we do it one best way. We can do it very quickly and efficiently. Blockchain is a digital ledger that allows different segments of the food system to capture information about the product, what they've done to it, where that product has been. If we're linking that data with other data points, the Internet of Things, all that information will yield to insights that will allow us to have a safer, more affordable and sustainable food system. But we don't believe traceability is the goal. We believe that transparency is the ultimate goal. Blockchain will give us the ability to not only track where food came from, but how it was produced. Was it produced safely? Was it produced responsibly? Is it sustainably grown? How many dates of shelf life are left on that product? The food system is a shared responsibility. And for blockchain and traceability and transparency to work, we need a lot of people working together. So we're excited to be working with IBM on this blockchain initiative. But it's not just Walmart and IBM. We actually have some of our suppliers participating in this pilot. We've got some universities also participating in the pilot. And so we'll make sure that all stakeholders work together for a safer and better food system.
So moving on from here, let's take some time and talk about, in order to drive these kind of insights, what sort of platform do firms need? What does the platform mean? What kind of functionality is required? What are some things that are really critical from a functional and non-functional perspective that are part of that platform, right? We already talked earlier when I showed you that chart about insurance companies having one-to-one partnerships with device vendors and value-add data suppliers. That's an issue. That's an ecosystem issue, right? So the whole idea is, for me, when I really talk about platform with a customer, I'm talking about what technology are they using to drive this? What's the ecosystem that surrounds it? Whether if it's IoT, you need devices involved, the other value-add data suppliers that you have helping drive the insight, and then you're driving some level of analytics in it, and you're driving AI and ML. You're probably going to catch me during this, lumping AI, ML, neural nets, all of it into just a generic analytics term. So when I just say analytics, it's all of the above, right? So there's no confusion. So this is a really key point. I can't underestimate how important this is in our conversations with customers, that when they're going on this kind of digital journey, they truly need to think about that business and technology plan, where the business needs to go, and what's that going to mean from a long-term perspective. Because the goal is, you want to build this platform and ecosystem once. Now maybe it's building blocks, so you don't do it all at once, but you want to build it once, and you want it to support many different use cases that you're trying to drive, right? And this is really the point. This doesn't happen by accident, right? So the firms truly need to look across their lines of business and really pull in all the key players. And they're not going to get it 100% right, because nobody is, because the business changed, the business drivers change. But if you get a significant percent correct, you're really moving yourself in the right direction, so then you can actually respond whenever the market turns and you need to react. This is really stressing the point that we talked about already, that this kind of platform needs to be able to cross industry boundaries. You cannot be locked in one industry. You need to be able to drive analytics across industry boundaries. And if you can't do that, it's a problem, because what we already talked about is the attacks are going to come across industry boundaries, and why not be the attacker as opposed to being attacked? Security is really key, right? These things have to be enterprise class we're talking about. They can't, be a bunch of people in a garage putting stuff together. There are definitely characteristics here that truly need to work very well. They need to operate on the edge. Does everybody know what that means? Okay. So one of the huge use cases that, and we could spend more time on this if we have time at the end, because I have some slides in the back of the deck, is around manufacturing, mining, construction. We send workers into work sites wired with a bunch of different types of IoT devices. We capture that data in real time, and we drive analytics on a mobile phone that they are carrying with them. The point being, so that's an edge analytics engine. It's not running in the cloud. It doesn't have to go back to the data center. We're driving analytics right here, and there's a number of reasons for doing it. From a cost perspective, it's cheaper. Performance is better. Furthermore, that particular employee could be working in an environment where there is no internet connectivity, but you still want to keep them out of harm's way, right? So a really important characteristic is the platform that we're talking about needs to be able to support different deployment patterns, and an edge pattern is really important. This is a key thing to a lot of firms, and what the slide is basically saying is a lot of this data, whether it's device data, telematics data, is to some degree useless until you've had a chance to integrate it, cleanse it, and do some level of scoring to that data. It's of no value. And for that matter, if you don't take action on it very quickly, some of this data can be useless in 5 minutes. You might as well throw it out if you did nothing with it. So really the point of this slide is, for many of these firms, why incur the cost of bringing all that data on site? Why not have somebody else do it, somebody else store it, somebody else maintain it, and in some cases, somebody else do an initial level of scoring to that data, and then when that's done, then take it in site, because then you could drive business value out of it. So this is really, for many firms, changing a CapEx equation to an OpEx equation. So it's really an important consideration in going down this journey. We already talked about ecosystem, right? These are some of the ecosystem players that we have, but it really doesn't matter. You need a big ecosystem to support where you think you want to go. This is just one example from an IBM perspective. If you guys don't know, we actually bought the weather company, right? So it's a big value-add data service provider for us. So at the end of the day, what are we really talking about? We're talking about being able to pull in near real-time analytics, historical analytics, and what we really want to build is a learning cycle where I can learn patterns out of those real-time analytics and impact my historical analytics and vice versa, and adjust based upon what I'm learning on an ongoing basis. So when I say adjust, I'm talking about adjusting my analytical models, right? Because now I know more things and I'm not going to look at the same event the same way anymore, okay? So this one might be, I'm not sure if people in the back can read this one, so I'll walk you through it. So first of all, across the top in the yellow-orange boxes, you're talking about really what I would call the analytics continuum. Right, so you want to understand descriptive, what happened, diagnostic, why did it happen, predictive of what will happen, and prescriptive of we don't want it to happen, we want to stop it from happening, right? So that's really the right-hand side, top right, is where everybody wants to be. Most firms are not there, really where they want to be yet, but you know, that's the goal. And what you have in these blue chevrons is all the different things. This is obviously sort of a high-level slide. It's not a detailed architecture slide. But the different things that you need from a platform perspective to meet those goals, right? So you need to be able to shop for data. You need to be able to ingest data in different ways. You need to be able to shape it, cleanse it, govern it. You need to be able to add value, add to that data, whether that's internal data that you're integrating with it or whether it's from external sources. You need to drive real-time analytics, historical analytics. You need to be able to trigger actions based upon what you learn, right? Whatever those particular actions are. We already talked about this. You need to be able to save those analytics in workbooks, notebooks, whatever it is. But the point there is, you're investing a lot of capital. And for those of you who know what data scientists bill out at, they're not cheap. So you're going to pay them a lot of money. You want to be able to leverage those results across your enterprise so when somebody else is working on a similar problem, they're not starting from scratch, right? So that's the concept of sharing workbooks, notebooks across your enterprise. You want to be able to put this stuff in production, right? And you need common data access across your enterprise to get at this. I'm intentionally skipping one other thing we're going to talk about in a bit, is you need AI transparency, which is directly applicable to the conversation you guys are having this morning. Right, so, and I don't mean to be picking on teams, but there was a team that was talking about, well, AI is going to do everything for you. Well, that's an awful lot of confidence that you agree with what's happening underneath the covers, what the AI engines are doing. Right? Without that transparency, there's tremendous risks at a corporate level, a personal level, you name it. And AI ethics and transparency is huge. It is a huge problem. We're working to solve it, and there's steps going forward, but it's a gigantic issue. Right. So just a comment, you know, when I say platform, I'm not talking about buying a platform from IBM. That's not the point. The point is, whatever vendor you buy from, however you build it, whether you build it yourself, whether you use open source, whether you use a vendor, whether you use all of the above, the point is, that's the functionality you need. There are many different ways to build it, and these are some of the key capabilities that you need. It's got to be standards-based. It needs to really support an aggressive life cycle, so this information can be churned through quickly. It needs to be able to have flexible deployment, hybrid. Cloud deployments are big. I'm assuming you guys are aware that we just bought Red Hat. That's why. Because of their ability to support hybrid cloud models, which is huge for, do you guys know what that is, what that means? So if you don't, the general idea is all significant or large customers going forward who move to cloud, and everybody will in some shape or form, they're going to have private cloud, public cloud, on-prem cloud. That's a hybrid implementation. And the whole idea is they need to actually integrate and talk to each other. Amazon can't do that, Google can't do that, Microsoft can do it a little bit. The whole idea of why we bought them was to move big into that space, because we're, quite honestly, one-on-one, we're losing to Amazon, we're losing to Google, we're never going to catch up, so we've moved into a different segment, right? So that's what we're talking about from a hybrid cloud perspective. All right, so to a large degree, we've been talking about a lot of use cases that are real-time analytics, right? You guys, I know you're all familiar with the benefits of historical analytics. So this particular use case is really focused on some work that we've done around analyzing IoT data, but there's lots of things, so I just had to pick examples, otherwise I'd be here for days talking to you all. So in this particular case, we had a combination of an insurance vendor and a device vendor, and they both gave us all of their connected home data for the entire United States for a year and said, hey, IBM, can you look at this and figure out what insights are in this data, right? And from the insurance company's perspective, they wanted to be able to sell value-add services back to their customers, but they weren't sure what was in the data, right? So in this particular case, we're really looking for events around a connected home, and it was really focused on water leaks, right? That's what that slide's telling you. And these were some of the different variables, right? And I know you can't read it, but it really doesn't matter that you can't read it. Really the point being where the home was, the zip code, if you will, because this was US based, the internal temperature, the external temperature, the weather, were the key things that were driving this. And what's kind of interesting is based upon this data, we were actually able to predict when there was going to be a water leak in a home. That's a big deal. It's really a big deal, right? And once again, big value add service, in this case we're talking about insurance, that they could let you know, hey, we see a cold front approaching, we recommend X, Y, and Z. Maybe you should, if the customer has a Nest thermostat or some sort of other connected thermostat, we see the temperature in your house is normally at 68. We recommend, in your basement or whatever, turn the temperature up to this, right? I mean, so there are lots of really positive things from a value-add service of how this data can be leveraged. All right, so I think, hopefully, this is going to be a section that you're all going to like. You all know there's tons of challenges around this, everything I just said. So let's spend some time talking about them. First one is many customers globally are really struggling on how to monetize the data. They have lots of data. They're able to drive lots of different types of analytics, but how do they sell it? Who do they sell it to? And can they actually make money on it? This is far from a trivial problem. This is a really big deal. I think you guys probably know this already. The real key is, do they have the skill to actually look at the lower level numbers to figure out? So let me back up for a second. We've had many customers come to us and say, hey IBM, we want to drive this kind of insight. So we set up a workshop, we work with them. Typically, they'll give us anywhere from 3 to 5 top use cases, which is what we normally ask for. We drive through it in a workshop, and in many cases, at least 50% of the use cases they're suggesting will not work. Either it's the business case doesn't work, or 2, the technology can't actually do what they want to do yet, right? So this is a significant challenge for many firms. So next question is, how do they actually go to market? Right, so I told you I was going to focus on insurance examples. So this is a sample data ownership dilemma that many insurance firms have, right? We've sort of touched on many times that data ownership is a challenge. Well, it is a challenge. In this particular case, this particular customer wanted a system integrator to own their whole solution. Right, so this was connected home, connected auto, and safer workplace. That was the example that I talked to you about people going into a workplace wearing wearable devices. the insurance company did not want to deal with device vendors. They did not want to have the contracts with the different value-add service providers. They basically just wanted somebody to do it for them. So that's where the system integrator came in. They wanted IBM to process the data. So you run into some real questions of the relationship and who owns the data and who's responsible for what and what does that mean from a legal perspective. And I'm assuming you guys are familiar with GDPR. This was actually an international example. Are you guys familiar with what GDPR is? Or yes, no, yes? Yes, okay. So GDPR plays a big role here, right? So I'm not going to walk you through my GDPR simple slides here, but the point being is that it has a significant impact on how these go-to-market relationships work, right? And these are some of the things that customers have to figure out when they develop their go-to-market strategies. We already talked about the use case monetization. What are the service levels? What sort of service do they actually need to provide to their end customers? What are the established relationships that they have that they want to leverage, whatever they are? We talked about, well, device vendor support is really key, right? So we've been talking about telematics examples. So if these are aftermarket telematics devices that are installed in cars, who's going to do it? If they break, who's going to fix it? Those are big questions. You have to figure out if you're selling this thing to somebody how you're going to handle those things. We already talked about data ownership, and GDPR falls under that, and rollout strategy is key too, depending what the effort is, what the marketplace, what the demographic that they're rolling this out to. All right, so the data and AI landscape. I think we've talked about this to some degree already, and that is the data landscape is really immature. I've got no other way to put it. I was going to say it sucks, but you know. There's many one-to-one relationships. I mean, I have to tell you, it is not a fair playing field. There are many vendors who have a ton of data that they're not sharing. We talked about automobile manufacturers already. They've got a ton of data many of you probably don't know about, and they're not sharing because they're viewing that, we talked about earlier about owning the customer relationship. It's their data, they want it. They want to leverage it how they want to use it, right? They're not necessarily sharing it with anybody else to run analytics on it. So the comment down here is there's actually a drive in an industry that you guys are probably aware of to drive higher levels of data sharing, as well as to drive sharing of AI models to really help drive the whole transparency thing. And what's actually interesting is they're trying to leverage blockchain to implement those sorts of patterns. Question?
Yeah.
There's never going to be free and equal access, black and white. That's not happening. But I'm going to hold off on the AI ethics stuff because I've got some slides following on it. The general idea, though, is, so let's talk about the exercise you did earlier today, right? What's the world going to look like in 2038, right? So there was some very optimistic stuff that I heard, and that's pretty cool. But when we're talking about AI driving a lot of significant decisions and really driving how the world runs, how's that going to work if there's not a common integration of all the data that should be brought together to do that analysis? That's what I'm talking about. Some sort of governance, information and sharing model, and whether, you know, some of the data, you know, names, addresses, serial numbers have to be blacked out, that's okay, right? Because that's the only way a lot of this is going to happen. But there's got to be something in the middle. There's got to be a gray. It can't be just a yes or no, because yes isn't going to happen and no is not going to work. So I don't necessarily have the answer of how that's going to play out, but the point being is that there's actually a movement and push across many large firms at a global level to try to figure out some middle model that would work for different players.
So that's the way.
Yes, yeah. All right, so this is an interesting thing. I think you're really familiar with this, but I thought I should put it in here. So one of the things customers are struggling with when they go on an AI journey or analytics journey is, what's the main business focus? Do we want to focus on making our customer experience better? right? That's like a Nordstrom sort of model. Do we want to create new digital products and services? And the reason why I mention this is customers who try to go down the middle road really struggle. It's hard to do both of these at the same time, right? I'm not saying you can't. I'm just telling you it's hard for them to do these at the same time. All right, so this is a real question. How many firms are truly ready to do AI? And what are the implications of that statement? I'm not going to read all these to you. You guys are going to get these slides, so you'll have it. But the basic bottom line is there's not a single global firm that I'm working with who does not have challenges of this nature. Data governance is huge. Data quality is huge. Data cleansing is huge. We already talked about integration, huge. And these aren't trivial issues, right? So there's a lot of corporate things that need to be done and commitment from firms to tackle some of these issues. You guys already know that data scientists, or I think many of you know, data scientists from a corporate perspective are very well paid employees, right? They drive a lot of business value. I'm not saying they shouldn't be paid well, that's not my point. But when you have data scientists who spend, on average, 60 to 80% of their time just getting the data together before they can actually run a model, I ask you, is that a sustainable pattern? I contend it isn't. I contend that's a real issue. So we've been talking about some of the challenges that firms have been having driving these things at a corporate level. What this slide is really talking about is how do you do it, right? How we want to drive analytics at a corporate level. Let's just talk about simple things. If we have teams of data scientists doing stuff and they're spending 60 to 80% of their time just cleansing data, and they maybe produce 2 models a year, because that's actually a common number, just because of what's involved to get it done. How do we measure success? What is success? How do we prioritize what we do within the firm? Are our lines of business actually willing to work with these people to drive real business change and value? I'm telling you, these are all challenges. There's some firms that have been more successful than others driving this, but these are significant challenges. I mean, I'm from IBM, but the reality is this is a point too. Does anybody really have what I need, right? And how much work do I need to do to build what I need? Do I need to? All right, so what are some challenges from a development perspective, whether this is for a vendor like IBM or whether this is for some global firm that's trying to build something, right? So common meta models. What am I talking about there? So we talked about connected home use cases around IoT, right? So I will tell you now, I know of probably at least 20 connected home temperature and humidity sensors from different vendors. If you guys are familiar with IoT, I will tell you right now, there's absolutely 0 standards on what the payloads in those devices look like. 0. So how am I supposed to run common analytics on that data? I want to run one analytic. I don't want to run 20 models. One. I need some way of pulling this data together into a common meta model so I can run common analytics, whether that data is coming from IoT devices or it's a mess from an enterprise perspective. It doesn't really matter. The point is, this is a critical issue. And it's causing challenges with a lot of firms, and for quite honestly, it's a challenge for IBM too, in us building solutions for our customers. How do we provide that functionality for them? Okay. Another challenge is common ontologies, right? So we talked about AI solutions around cancer, and if the Watson engine is reading papers, which it does, millions and millions of cancer papers globally, it's got to understand what they're saying. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So it's got to understand the language of cancer. But whether it's IBM or somebody else, how do we decide which ontologies to build? How do we read the market to understand what are the key business problems and what ontologies should we figure out or not? That's far from a trivial problem, right? Because this takes a lot of time to do it right? But I will tell you now, a customer comes to me and says, oh, well, I love Watson. This is the problem we want to solve. Here's the use case. And I have to tell them, well, we don't have that ontology. They move on. They look for somebody else who has it, or they do it themselves. This is not a trivial thing. How do you figure out what to build so you can really effectively do natural language processing, so whatever it is you're doing can understand the subject, right? This is an interesting one. This is actually a pet peeve of mine. Before my current position, I was driving the technology and business strategy for what we brought to market around IoT. I was actually doing that from the development perspective, so I drove what the teams were actually producing. I mean, I have to just say it the way it is. I hate this concept. I just hate it. Right? I think you guys are probably familiar with this general idea of a minimal viable product, and the whole idea. So it's a dialectical opposite. It's really quality versus quantity. Right? So the idea is on one half, well, we got to get something out to market. We're going to miss the market. Customers need this. We got to put something out. We can't take a year to build it. On the flip side, if you put out something so lacking in functionality and you really don't know what the core requirements are, customers are going to look at it and laugh. And you're never going to get the feedback from customers, which was the whole idea of putting out an MVP. You want them to look at it and say, well, that's pretty cool. We'll work with you, and here are the 5 other things we want. They're just going to walk away. This is a real challenge, right? Some other sort of related challenges is IBM's huge. We have a big width and breadth. But being big sometimes means you have inertia. And you can't necessarily respond quickly to point niche. Give me 1 second. You can't respond quickly to point niche solutions that customers might want. Smaller firms can. The opposite of that is if you're a smaller firm, typically you probably can't support all those platform requirements, which you really need to do the end-to-end journey of where you want to go. Right? So there's a lot of considerations here of how you play, what's your go-to-market strategy, who you partner with. Did you have a question?
No, but isn't that exactly what you're doing with our data?
All right, so I mentioned earlier that there needs to be common access across enterprise to get at the data. That's a huge challenge. Huge challenge. Most large organizations, as you probably know, have really stovepipes from line of business, from, if you're at a global bank, you're dealing with institutional banking, you're dealing with retail banking, you're dealing with wealth management. The data's not shared. You can't access it across the enterprise in the same ways. The APIs are different, whatever. We're working with many firms on building common API frameworks across their entire organization to standardize how the data is accessed. This is a big challenge. I'm not saying we have all the answers, but it's something we're working to try to solve. I'm probably going to go through these pretty fast. We're sort of low on time. I don't want to keep you from lunch. Bringing data into an enterprise once and only once. Big issue. Big challenge. It's the way it should be done, but it isn't done that way. So the whole idea is you bring it in once and you pipe it through the organization, whether it's through streaming technology, whether it's through Kafka, I don't really care what it is. You pipe it through that organization as needs be, but bring it in once, not 3, 4, 5, 20 times. Issue. This is talking about in the bottom left-hand corner that when I ingest the data, and I perhaps augment it with legacy data to pull in name and address data, other customer data, and then I integrate it with weather data, traffic data, telematics data, whatever. I need some common way of doing that so I can drive those common analytics we were talking about. Also a challenge. We already talked about the common meta models. This top right-hand corner, what we're really talking about is one of the things that firms are really struggling with is, you guys familiar with the whole idea that real-time data comes in one pipe, historical data comes in another pipe? typically Lambda architectures or Kappa architectures, and maybe the ETL from one to the other. It's ugly. There are all sorts of costs and issues around that kind of approach. So building something that can pull real-time data in very quickly, land it very quickly, access it dirty, access it clean, and move it into an area where you can do historical and real-time analytics at once is a big issue. We've got something out there in the marketplace, other people do too, but this is something that customers are really looking for. And really the last point on this slide is, I had the slide that said, are you ready for AI? Well, we talked about governance and quality and things of that nature. One of the things customers are really looking for is they want to leverage AI to drive their data quality and governance. Because there's no way in the world they have enough bodies in the world that they could do it manually. It's just not going to happen. Right? So we're talking about scanning through data, understanding what it is, and doing like auto term assignment. Oh, well, field XYZ is actually a shoe size or an address or whatever. I mean, so to really be able to look at data, understand what it is, and that really requires, we talked about ontologies, it's got to understand what the data is and do that kind of assignment. That's also going to be a key thing to truly move firms into AI, because if the data is garbage, AI is just not going to work. All right, ethics. So we've talked about this a lot. A couple key points. Well, you laugh at this. You laugh at this, but read this. Read the text below it. And this is just an example from Australia, but it really is to the point that, we talked about earlier about how the business and technology strategy should be one and the same. But if you have the majority of people sitting on your boards that don't understand the technology, can you truly, as an organization, make the right decisions around analytics and AI? I contend no, and that's really what this is pointing out, right? That's an issue, right? Where businesses are going, if you don't understand the technology, that's a gap, right? So this is an interesting one too. Is the gentleman up back? There you are now. Had mentioned data scientists and new approach and new techniques. What do firms do with their employees who they want to be able to work on AI, but they don't understand the technology? How do you train them? How do you keep them engaged? What does that mean from a corporate perspective? All right, this is actually something that, you see it's got an IBM Confidential on the bottom. This is actually something that we released recently. It is not going to solve the whole problem, but the general idea around AI transparency is you can understand what the model did. You have a history of what the model actually executed. You could go back in the log and actually see what was done. It will take your model from a data scientist team and put it in a real production environment from an agile development perspective. So there's a real pipeline there. So you actually know it's going to have production quality levels of service. These are all challenges. And I'm telling you, this is a very recent release for us, right? I believe, I'm not a sales guy here, but we're really the first person to put this out. And something that has this kind of functionality in the marketplace, which is, it was really secret for a good while. I'm not saying that to be boastful of IBM. I'm saying that because to me that's scary, that we're the only vendor who's released something like this, because this problem is huge. And there needs to be a lot more players involved, and there needs to be more things than what we've addressed so far to really deal with this AI ethics and transparency. Business strategy, I don't really see anybody starting at the same point on their analytics journey. There's lots of different ways to start. There are lots of different ways to tackle it. Now, this is an interesting question I figured somebody was going to ask when I threw up this slide. Well, if you have an insurance firm and they're US and they're property and casualty, blah, 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 is there a defined path? We're absolutely seeing more and more patterns of how people want to tackle the problems. But I'm not going to tell you that we have it all figured out yet, because, you know, I think we all know in this room that this is really an evolving space. And a lot of these things are probably going to solidify over the next couple of years, but there are definitely some patterns that are evolving. So I think we've covered most of these. I don't think I need to really go through these. This is really my closing point, and it's really back to a message I think I've delivered a number of times already today, and that is, you know, the key takeaway for these firms and you know, in the conversations that I have with executives is how important it is that they position themselves from a business and technology perspective that they can respond to the marketplace. Because it's the one thing nobody can take away from them. Everything else, forget it. You can't protect it. And firms really are taking this seriously. They're trying to take steps forward, sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but I think you guys know how that works. That was it. So I'm willing to stay as long as you want for further questions, comments, thoughts. Okay. Okay.